Art is in the eye of the beholder. Art is defined as the expression and application of human creative skill and imagination. But what is it that drives some of these creative geniuses to take someone else's life? Hello everybody, I am Ninjake, and here are 5 artists who committed murder in this week's episode of Twisted World. Perhaps adhering to the views of the churches he sold to could have resulted in a much longer life. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio is known for his paintings that combine a very realistic observation of the human state in both the physical and emotional form, and he also focuses highly on dramatic lighting in them to convey the most important parts of his paintings. Many of his paintings were often embroiled in controversy because they were religious scenes, and he had used prostitutes for models when painting the Virgin Mary, and conveyed some of the disciples of Jesus as simple commoners instead of their intended roles as philosophers. His painting style led to the Baroque period of painting and was accepted by many. However, his commissioned work for various churches were often returned to him, and the churches requested that he repaint them in a much less sinful manner. But as Caravaggio earned a living with his religious works, he wasn't really your typical churchgoer. He was a man of very little patience and, with a very quick temper, would often be found in fights in public and was in the bad books of the law quite often. During one of these fights, however, he wound up killing a man and subsequently escaping Rome, and managed to escape arrest as well. Caravaggio would then go from being one of the most famous painters in Rome to the most famous painter in Naples as he fled Rome. However, he would jump from place to place, including being arrested and escaping imprisonment in Malta until his death in 1610 at the age of only 38. It's said he died of a fever. However, some argue that he was murdered by his enemies. Some say that the paints he used at the time killed him due to being lead-based, resulting in poisoning. But judging by the life he led, it wouldn't be such a far-off call to say that he got onto the wrong side of the wrong person and met an untimely end. His legacy lives on in his artwork, which can be viewed in various museums and churches around Rome. This one could actually be labelled a mysterious mystery. Born Edward James Muggeridge, English photographer Edward Muybridge changed his name to what he believed to be the original Anglo-Saxon form of his name, something many think was due to him changing due to a life-altering event. This man was a pioneer for his work in photographic studies and contributed early work to motion picture projection. A man who basically helped us get to where we are today with modern camera hardware, killed a man and got away with it, even after being tried for the murder. At roughly the age of 42, Muybridge married Flora Shawcross Stone, a woman half his age at 21. 2 years later, Muybridge would discover that Flora's 7-month-old son, Florado, may not have been his, and may have actually been the son of a drama critic named Major Harry Larkins. Major Harry Larkins had sent Florado's mother a letter, basically asking if he was the father or not. On the 17th of October of the same year, 1874, Muybridge tracked down Larkins and said to the man, "Good evening, Major. My name is Muybridge, and here's the answer to the letter you sent my wife," and at point-blank range shot Larkins, who would die later that night. Needless to say, Muybridge was arrested for the murder, but he put up no protest and was placed into jail. It's worth mentioning that life-altering event that Muybridge had was a bit of an accident. While spending time in Texas in 1860, Muybridge was involved in a stagecoach accident. The stagecoach violently lost control and became a runaway. Every single passenger on board the stagecoach was injured, and one person actually died due to the horrific crash. Muybridge, though, was completely ejected from the vehicle, and once he hit the ground, his head collided with a hard object, possibly a rock. Muybridge was then taken 150 miles from Texas to Arkansas for treatment, where he would stay for a quarter of a year as he attempted to recover from his symptoms, which included double vision, confused thinking, and having the inability to properly smell or taste. He then went to New York City for further treatment before returning to England a year later. So when Muybridge was arrested for the murder of Major Harry Larkins in Napa, California in 1874, it's no wonder that he pleaded insanity due to the injuries sustained in the stagecoach accident 14 years prior. Some of the people that Muybridge knew even testified that pre-accident Muybridge was a pleasant individual. However, post-accident he suddenly changed to being unstable and erratic. However, Muybridge himself would undermine his own plea of insanity by saying that his actions were premeditated and that he did what he had intended to do. During the case, Muybridge was a bit of an odd person and would often show signs of complete indifference and sometimes would just explode with uncontrolled emotion. So with the fact that this man basically said he went and killed the man that possibly fathered his son on purpose, you'd be surprised to know the outcome. The jury threw out the idea of Muybridge being insane, however they acquitted him anyway. The grounds that he was acquitted on were that of justifiable homicide. Homicide can only be justified if it prevents greater harm to innocence. It must be objectively proven categorically and beyond any reasonable doubt that the victim was going to commit an act of violence, making the homicide blameless. This is the only way to rule something a justifiable homicide. So even though it seems that Muybridge simply went to Larkins and shot him dead, the court seemed to think that there must have been some form of threat towards someone innocent, possibly the son, Florado, but it was not truly known as to why that verdict was given. Because of the ruling, Edward Muybridge would go on to lead a long and successful life before succumbing to prostate cancer at the age of 74 in 1904. An English painter with a flair for minuscule detail murdered his namesake. Richard Dadd was a very talented painter and was accepted into the Royal Academy of Arts at 20 years of age, where he would go on to win the Medal for Life Drawing in 1840. He was also considered the leading talent of a group called The Clique that contained artists such as William Powell Frith, Augustus Egg and Henry O'Neill, among others. In July of 1842, Sir Thomas Phillips, the Mayor of Newport at the time, elected to bring Dadd along with him as his draftsman during the expedition through Europe to Greece, Turkey, southern Syria and Egypt. Towards the end of their expedition, the two would have a grueling time in Syria, going from Jerusalem to Jordan. In December of 1842, while travelling up the River Nile via boat, Dadd was said to undergo a change to his personality so dramatic that he became delusional and would become very violent, believing himself to have been influenced by Osiris, an Egyptian god. At first it was thought to be sunstroke, but it seemed to be a lot more serious than that. Upon returning home from his expedition with Sir Thomas, Dadd was found to have been of not sound mind and was taken to recover by his family to the countryside. In August of the same year, 1843, Dadd became convinced that his own father was the devil in disguise, so Dadd murdered his father with a knife and fled to France. He didn't get very far though, as when he was en route to Paris, Dadd tried to kill again. This time it was of a tourist with a razor. He failed in this attempt, however, ending up being arrested by police. He subsequently confessed to the murder of his father and was returned to England, where he was committed to the criminal department of Bethlem Psychiatric Hospital, better known as Bedlam. It's believed that Dadd suffered from a form of paranoid schizophrenia, and because of this he would live out the rest of his days in Bedlam before being transferred to Broadmoor Hospital, which would be his final home before dying of an extensive disease of the lungs. Whatever demons Richard Dadd had, they did not stop him from painting, as much of his creative works and masterpieces, including his most celebrated work, The Fairy Fella's Masterstroke, would be created while under psychiatric care, and some of his paintings are still on display at Broadmoor Hospital, while one long-lost painting of his tour to the Middle East, showing his party by the Dead Sea with him in the painting, was sold to the British Museum for £100,000. It just goes to show you that you never truly know how a person's mind truly works. Who knew that being a good singer and having good behaviour would ensure a prison release? Huddy William Ledbetter, better known as Leadbelly, was a blues musician from America who was known for his amazing vocals while also playing the 12-string guitar, and would often sing songs about women, work, prison, dancing and racism. Leadbelly was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988 as recognition for his work, despite killing a member of his own family. Leadbelly would sometimes allow his temper to get the better of him, so much so that he was sent to prison for carrying a pistol. He soon after escaped prison though. A few years later he was arrested in Sugar Land, Texas for killing a member of his own family, Will Stafford, during a fight over a woman. In 1925, Leadbelly wrote a song to Governor Pat Morris Neff, looking to procure his freedom. Joining the fact that he had served the minimum of 7 years on his 7 to 35-year sentence, his good behaviour and the song to the governor, he was pardoned and released. 5 years later though, in 1930, Leadbelly would be in prison again, this time for attempted homicide for stabbing a white man while in another fight. It was in prison though that father and son duo John and Alan Lomax discovered Leadbelly. John Lomax was a folklorist working to preserve folk music in America. The Lomaxes were said to have recorded hundreds of Leadbelly songs. Leadbelly was released having served nearly all of his minimum time on his prison sentence, partnered with a song called Governor O.K. Allen Blues, which was made for Governor Oscar K. Allen of Louisiana. Hoodie William Leadbetter would go on to have a very successful career before passing away at the age of 61 on December 6, 1949. However, his music still lives on, and as well as being placed in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he was also placed into the Louisiana Music Hall of Fame in 2008. This just goes to show you that, in a very twisted way, speaking to people through art can get you pretty much anywhere. From being idolised by audiences everywhere to becoming the most wanted man in America with a $100,000 bounty. John Wilkes Booth made his living as an actor. When he first started out, audiences would hiss at him for being so inexperienced and for missing some of his lines, but he grew to the point where critics were calling him a natural genius and was said to have an astonishing memory. When family friend John T. Ford opened the Ford's Theatre, a 1,500 seated theatre in Washington DC in 1863, Booth was one of the first men to appear in a leading role there, playing the lead in The Marble Heart. It's said though that Booth during the play delivered one of the lines and shook a finger in the direction of the presidential box, right where Abraham Lincoln was sitting. While this man was wowing audiences and critics alike with his ability to change roles and play them so well, he was set in his ways behind the scenes. Booth was a Confederate sympathiser and was a strong opposer to slavery being abolished in the United States. At one point he even said that he admired the secession of the South, calling it to be heroic publicly. Local New Yorkers were enraged by this, calling for him to be banned from the stage for saying such treasonable things. However, critics gave the guy a break with more rave reviews, and work was never hard for him to find. With the 1864 presidential election drawing nearer, Booth was angered by the prospect of Lincoln being re-elected and blamed him for all of the troubles that plagued the South and the American Civil War itself. This was when Booth had a plan to kidnap the president from his summer residence at the Old Soldiers' Home, which was just 3 miles from the White House. The plan was to smuggle the president across the Potomac River into Richmond and, once in the hands of the Confederate Army, would be exchanged for the release of Confederate prisoners of war from northern prisons. Booth had hoped that this would bring about the end of the war, where the Union would hopefully recognise the Confederate government. However, in April of 1865, the kidnapping plan was no longer going to work, as Robert E. Lee, the leader of the Confederate Army, had surrendered. The kidnapping wouldn't work now, but he told an associate that he was done with acting and would henceforth only star in Venice Preserved. This was a confusing thing to be told until you realise what Venice Preserved means. Venice Preserved is about an assassination plot. Booth had heard Lincoln make a speech from his window the previous day, and as Lincoln proclaimed his favour for granting suffrage, or the right to vote, to former slaves, Booth declared that that was going to be the last speech that Lincoln would ever make. On April 14, 1965, Booth went to the Ford's Theatre to pick up his mail, where he was informed by John T. Ford's brother that Lincoln and his wife, General Ulysses S. Grant, and the leader of the Union Army and his wife would be attending a play. Booth then immediately began planning the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Booth would then gather his close allies who were big South sympathisers as well, David Herold, George Azotot and Lewis Powell. Herold was to assist Booth in their escape to Virginia, a Confederate state. Azotot was assigned to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Powell was to assassinate the Secretary of State William H. Seward. The plan was that by targeting the president and his 2 immediate successors to the presidency, the Union government would be decapitated, throwing the Union into a state of panic and would hopefully spur the Confederate Army back into action. Being the famous actor that he was, Booth was able to just enter the Ford's Theatre with ease and had access to every part of the theatre. At around 10 PM, as the play was going on, Booth slithered into the presidential box and shot Abraham Lincoln in the head with a .41 caliber Derringer. Booth managed to escape by stabbing Major Harry Rathbone, who was also in the box with Lincoln and their 2 significant others, and Booth jumped from the box to the stage, raising his knife in the air and shouting "Sic semper tyrannis," which is the Latin for "thus always to tyrants," the state motto of Virginia. Booth was the only conspirator to actually succeed in their assassinations. Powell stabbed William H. Seward, who was already bedridden and still managed to survive, and Azadar couldn't go through with his assassination and instead drank alcohol, never even attempting to murder Vice President Andrew Johnson. 12 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Everton Conger, a Civil War intelligence officer, tracked down the location of Booth to a farm owned by Richard H. Garrett. It's believed that the Garretts had been completely unaware of the assassination of President Lincoln and were told by Booth that he was an injured Confederate soldier under the name of James W. Boyd and was returning home after the Battle of Petersburg. Conger found Booth and his accomplice Herold on the farm hiding in the Garrett's tobacco barn. Herold surrendered, but Booth wouldn't give up, saying that he would rather fight. The barn was then set ablaze with Booth inside it. While he was moving around and avoiding flames, Sergeant Boston Corbett shot him, ignoring orders of having Booth taken alive. Booth would then die on the porch of the Garrett's farmhouse 3 hours later. In his dying moments, Booth was able to say, "Tell my mother I died for my country," and then he asked for his hands to be raised to his face as to look at them. Booth's final words were, "Useless. Useless." Found on his person was his diary, where he had written, "Our country owed all of her troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment." Such a deep-seated hatred for a single man turned John Wilkes Booth from one of the most beloved on the stage to one of the most infamous men in history, becoming the first man to ever assassinate a president. John Wilkes Booth also maintained throughout his life that, of all the Shakespearean characters he played, his favourite was that of Brutus, the man who had a leading role in the assassination of Julius Caesar, also known as the slayer of a tyrant. You never truly know what is happening in someone's mind, and think about that the next time you watch your favourite creator on YouTube, because although they may seem brilliant on the surface, you may never know what they are capable of until it's too late. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Twisted World. If you like this episode, be sure to like this video and also click onto the other videos that are beside me right now and click right here to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss anything. Also be sure to follow me on all of my various social media outlets as to make sure you never miss another video. We may never truly know how people's minds work in such a twisted world, but as the saying goes, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And if we can learn anything from history, it's how to spot the people who make this a twisted world. But don't forget,
the shadows have the best stories.